At Thanksgiving dinner, my son leaned over and whispered, "Mom, are you living comfortably on the $10,000 I send you?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The table was loud. Laughter, silverware clinking against china, my grandchildren arguing about who got the last dinner roll. No one else heard him. But I did. And I heard what he meant. I looked at him carefully before answering. My son has always been successful. Corner office. Luxury SUV. The kind of man who checks his watch even when he isn't in a hurry. The kind of man who believes providing money is the same thing as providing love. He had started sending me $10,000 a month about a year ago. He insisted. Said it made him feel better. Said he wanted to take care of me. I told him I was fine. He said, "Let me do this." So I let him. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted to see something. Across the table, his wife, Amanda, was smiling at something my granddaughter said. She didn't hear the whisper. Or maybe she did. Sometimes tone travels further than words. I noticed something in his expression. It wasn't concern. It wasn't kindness. It was curiosity mixed with ownership. As if he was checking on an investment. Are you living comfortably? Comfortably. The word lingered. As if comfort had a price tag. As if my well-being could be itemized on a spreadsheet. I picked up my glass of water and took a slow sip before responding. I didn't rush. I never rush important moments. My son watched me closely. He expected gratitude. Maybe even admiration. Instead, I asked him quietly, "Why do you ask?" He leaned back slightly, just enough to signal confidence. "I just want to make sure the money's being put to good use." Good use. There it was. Not love. Not support. Use. I studied his face. The same face I used to wipe mashed sweet potatoes from when he was 3 years old. The same eyes that once looked up at me in the dark and asked if monsters were real. Now those eyes were measuring me. Measuring my lifestyle. Measuring my dependence. I didn't feel angry. I felt clarity. Because in that moment, I understood something he didn't. He thought he was taking care of me. He thought I was living off him. He thought he had quietly become the head of the family. What he didn't know was that I had made certain decisions long before he ever set up that monthly transfer. Decisions he never asked about. Decisions he never needed to know. Until now. The turkey was being carved at the other end of the table. My grandson spilled cranberry sauce. Amanda stood up to grab napkins. Life continued around us. But something had shifted. And my son didn't realize it yet. I placed my glass down gently and turned slightly toward him. "You're worried about whether I'm comfortable?" I asked. He nodded once. "Yes." I gave him a small smile. The kind that doesn't challenge. The kind that doesn't defend. The kind that waits. "I am," I said. And then I added, very calmly. "But not in the way you think." He frowned slightly. For the first time that evening, he wasn't sure what he was hearing. And that's when I realized something else. He had never once asked me if I needed the money. He had only asked if I was enjoying it. There's a difference. And before that dinner was over, he was going to understand exactly what that difference meant. But not yet. First, I wanted him to believe he still held all the power. Because sometimes, the quietest shift is the most permanent one. He didn't respond right away. That small line, "but not in the way you think," unsettled him more than I expected. My son has always been comfortable in rooms where he feels in control. Boardrooms. Negotiations. Investment calls. But this wasn't one of those rooms. This was his childhood dining table. And I was not one of his clients. He shifted slightly in his chair, adjusting his cufflinks. A habit he has when something doesn't sit right with him. "What do you mean?" he asked quietly. His voice stayed polite, but there was an edge beneath it. Around us, dinner continued. My granddaughter was telling Amanda about a school project. Someone laughed at the far end of the table. Plates were being passed. Wine was poured. No one noticed the shift happening between us. That's the thing about power. It rarely announces itself. "I mean," I said calmly, "comfort isn't always about how much money someone sends you." He gave a small, controlled smile. "I know that, Mom. I just want to make sure you're okay." There it was again. Make sure. As if my life required monitoring. I studied his face carefully. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He truly believed he was being generous. But generosity loses its purity when it comes with an invisible contract. "You've never asked me what my expenses are," I said softly. That caught him off guard. He blinked once. "Well, I assumed." "Yes," I replied gently. "You assumed." He leaned back. For the first time, his confidence thinned slightly. "I send $10,000 every month," he said, quieter now. That's more than enough for you to live comfortably. More than enough. The phrase hung in the air between us. Enough for whom? Enough according to whose standards? I nodded slowly. It is, I agreed. That surprised him. He expected resistance. Or denial. Or maybe gratitude. Instead, he got agreement. And that unsettled him even more. Amanda glanced in our direction briefly. Not long enough to interrupt, but long enough to sense something was different. My son lowered his voice further. Then why do you live in that tiny apartment? He asked. So he knew. Of course he did. He had visited once, months ago. Stayed less than 15 minutes. He called it efficient. I smiled slightly. I like small spaces, I said. They're honest. He frowned. Honest. Yes. They don't pretend to be more than they are. That landed. He didn't respond immediately. Because deep down, he knew what I was implying. His home was nearly 5,000 square feet. Vaulted ceilings. Marble countertops. A 3-car garage. But every time I visited, I noticed something else. Silence between conversations. Distance across hallways. Space that felt more impressive than warm. You don't have to live like that anymore, he said. Not when I can afford to help you. And there it was. The core of it. When I can afford to help you. The sentence wasn't cruel. But it positioned him above me. As provider. As rescuer. As authority. I folded my hands on the table. Let me ask you something, I said quietly. He waited. If I stopped accepting the money tomorrow, what would change for you? He hesitated. That wasn't the direction he expected. I don't know, he admitted. Nothing, I guess. Are you sure? I asked. Because I knew something he hadn't yet. Examined. That monthly transfer wasn't just for me. It made him feel powerful. Responsible. Important. It gave him a role shift he hadn't consciously acknowledged. The child becomes the provider. The parent becomes the dependent. It's a subtle reversal. And reversals change dynamics. He looked down at his plate for a moment. Turkey untouched. Mashed potatoes cooling. For me, he said carefully, it feels right. I nodded. For you, I repeated. That word again. Comfort. Right. Enough. All defined from his side of the table. What he didn't know, what he had never asked, was whether I had structured my life in a way that made that money necessary at all. He had assumed need. He had never verified it. An assumption, especially in families, can quietly grow into hierarchy. Across the table, my grandson asked if we could go around and say what we were thankful for. The timing made me smile internally. My son looked at me again. So, are you, he asked, almost stubbornly now, comfortable? I held his gaze. Yes, I said, but not because of the 10,000. That was the first time his composure cracked, just slightly. Because for the first time, a possibility entered his mind that he had never considered. What if the money wasn't what defined my stability? What if I wasn't dependent? What if he had misread the entire structure of our relationship? He straightened in his chair, and I could see it happening. The calculation, the quiet mental inventory. Because if the money didn't equal control, then what did? And that was the moment I knew. The real conversation hadn't even begun yet. He thought the $10,000 made him the provider. He had no idea where that money had actually been going. My grandson started the thankful circle at the far end of the table. Children first. Then Amanda. Then my son. I'm thankful for family, he said. It was automatic. Clean. Polished. When it was my turn, I didn't rush. I'm thankful for clarity, I said. No one reacted much to that. It sounded harmless enough. But my son looked at me. Because he knew that word wasn't random. Dinner moved forward. Plates were refilled. Dessert was brought out. Pumpkin pie. Whipped cream. The usual traditions. On the outside, nothing had changed. On the inside, something had. After dessert, Amanda took the kids to the living room. A movie started playing softly. The house shifted from dinner energy to evening quiet. My son stayed at the table. So did I. He poured himself a little more wine. Then he said, okay, what does that mean? He didn't pretend anymore. He wasn't asking casually. He was asking because something didn't add up. You said the money isn't what makes you comfortable, he continued. So what does? I folded my napkin slowly before answering. Security, I said. Stability. Independence. He nodded. That's exactly why I send it. No, I said gently. That's why you think you send it. That stopped him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him of anything. I simply let the distinction sit there. He frowned slightly. What are you saying? I looked at him carefully. I'm saying you never asked whether I needed it. He opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. Because he hadn't. Not once. The transfers had started after a casual comment I made about downsizing. I mentioned selling the house. He interpreted that as vulnerability. He reacted with money. That's how he solves problems. Quick, efficient, transactional. I assumed, he began again. Yes, I replied calmly. You assumed I was in trouble. He didn't like that word. Not trouble, he corrected. Just aging. There it was. Aging. Translation, declining. Dependent. Slipping. I didn't flinch. I am aging, I agreed. That doesn't mean I'm incapable. He leaned back again, this time less confidently. You live in 161 square feet, he said. That's not exactly comfortable. I chose it, I answered. Why? Because here was the real question. Not about money. Not about comfort. About choice. I sold the house at the top of the market, I said. I invested the equity. I simplified my expenses. I eliminated property taxes, maintenance, utility overhead. He stared at me. You what? I optimized, I said quietly. That word landed harder than anything else I'd said all evening. Optimized. It was his language. The language of efficiency, of strategy, of long-term gain. You invested it? He asked slowly. Yes. How much? I didn't answer that directly. Enough, I said. More than enough. He blinked. Because now the narrative he had been carrying for a year started to fracture. In his version of events, he was supporting his aging mother. In reality, I had structured my finances so carefully that the $10,000 a month had never been necessary. It had been extra. I don't understand, he said. I know, I replied gently. And I didn't say it with superiority. I said it with patience. The money you send, I continued, hasn't been spent. His jaw tightened. What do you mean it hasn't been spent? I mean, I said evenly, it's been redirected. Silence filled the space between us. Not loud, but heavy. Redirected where? He asked. I held his gaze. Into an account in your children's names. That was the moment everything shifted. Not dramatically, not explosively, but structurally. He stared at me as if I had just spoken a different language. All of it, he asked. Every dollar. He sat back completely now. Processing. Recalculating. For a year, he believed he was financing my life. In reality, he had been funding his children's future. Without knowing. Without controlling it. Without owning the narrative. You didn't tell me, he said quietly. You didn't ask, I replied. There was no accusation in my tone. Just truth. And truth, when delivered calmly, is difficult to fight. He ran a hand through his hair. So you don't need it? No. That single word carried more weight than anything else said that night. He had built an identity around being the provider. And now, that role dissolved. Not because I rejected him, but because it had never been required. For the first time since he whispered at dinner, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't control. It was uncertainty. Because if he wasn't the one holding everything up, then what was his role? And more importantly, who had he been trying to impress? He thought he was rescuing me. He didn't realize I had already secured the entire family's future without telling him. He sat there for a long moment after I told him the money had been redirected into accounts for his children. Not spent. Not touched. Not needed. Redirected. For the kids? He repeated quietly. Yes. Why wouldn't you tell me? I watched his expression carefully. Because this wasn't anger. This was destabilization. When you first started sending it, I said calmly, you didn't frame it as a discussion. You framed it as a decision. He opened his mouth slightly, then closed it. Memory was catching up with him. He had called me one evening and said, I've set up a transfer. It's automatic. Don't argue with me. It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't collaborative either. You didn't ask what I needed, I continued. You decided what I should receive. He leaned forward now, elbows on the table. I was trying to help. I know, I said gently. And I meant it. This wasn't about punishing him. It was about correcting the structure. But help that isn't requested, I added softly, can quietly become control. That landed harder than anything else I'd said so far. Because now we weren't talking about money. We were talking about identity. He exhaled slowly. I wasn't trying to control you. No, I agreed. You were trying to feel necessary. That's when he went silent. Completely silent. Not defensive. Not reactive. Just still. For a man who measures his worth in performance and provision, necessity is everything. He has built companies, led teams, closed deals worth millions. He is used to being indispensable. And without realizing it, He had tried to recreate that dynamic inside his own family. If you don't need the money, he said carefully, why accept it? It was a fair question. I wanted to see how you carried it, I answered. He looked up sharply. Carried what? The role. He didn't understand at first. So I clarified. When you began sending it, you changed something inside yourself. You stood a little taller when you visited. You spoke slightly differently. You started checking whether I had upgraded anything. He looked uncomfortable now. Because it was true. I didn't realize, he admitted. Most shifts happen quietly, I said. He stared at the empty pie plate in front of him. I thought I was being generous. You were, I said. But generosity without humility becomes hierarchy. That sentence sat between us for several seconds. He had never considered that his generosity might have restructured the emotional balance of the relationship. To him, money solved problems. To me, money can also create invisible ones. You really invested all of it? He asked again. Yes. How much is there now? Enough that your children will graduate without debt, I said evenly. He swallowed, because now the numbers in his head were multiplying. 10,000 a month. 12 months. Compounded returns. A year. He did the math quickly. And you did this without telling me. Yes. Why? Because this was the real answer. Because it wasn't my job to. Protect your ego, I said gently. That wasn't an attack. It was a boundary. He leaned back slowly. For the first time that night, he looked smaller. Not diminished, but recalibrating. I didn't realize I made you feel dependent, he said. You didn't, I replied. I allowed you to believe I was. That distinction mattered. I had never asked for rescue. He had projected vulnerability onto me, and I had let him. Because sometimes, allowing someone to reveal their assumptions teaches them more than confronting them immediately. From the living room, I could hear my grandchildren laughing. The sound was light, uncomplicated, and that's what this was always about. Not pride, not dominance, not proving a point. Protection. I don't want you thinking I see you as weak, he said quietly. I don't, I replied. But I also don't need you seeing me as someone you have to carry. He nodded slowly. The shift was happening. Subtle. Internal. He had built a narrative where he was the strong one and I was the fragile one. Now that narrative was dissolving. And if I stopped sending it, he asked. You're free to decide, I said. But understand something first. He waited. If you stop because you're embarrassed, that's ego. If you stop because you understand I don't require it, that's growth. He absorbed that. Because for the first time, the decision wasn't about money. It was about maturity. He looked at me differently now. Not as someone he supports. Not as someone who depends on him. But as someone who made strategic moves he never saw coming. And that realization did something important. It removed the illusion of imbalance. For a year, he believed he was holding me up. Now he understood. I had been steady the entire time. The next question wasn't whether I needed his money. It was whether he needed to be the one sending it. He sat there quietly for a while after that. Not defensive. Not arguing. Thinking. For a man who moves quickly, this was new territory. Slow reflection. I don't know what to do with that, he finally admitted. And that was honest. He had built his adult identity on achievement. Promotion after promotion. Bigger deals. Larger responsibilities. He solved problems with resources. If something felt unstable, he reinforced it with money. Now he was facing something money couldn't solve. You don't have to do anything, I said calmly. That's the point. He gave a small, uneasy smile. That's easy for you to say. No, I replied softly. It's easy for me to live. He looked up at that. Because that sentence didn't match the image he had constructed. In his mind, my small apartment symbolized limitation. A narrowing life. A quiet decline. He never considered that it might symbolize freedom. I chose smaller, I continued. So I wouldn't have to depend on anyone. That includes me, he asked. That includes everyone. The room had grown quiet. The dishwasher hummed in the kitchen. From the living room, the television flickered softly. For the first time that night, he wasn't measuring me. He was measuring himself. I thought I was being a good son, he said. You are, I answered immediately. And I meant it. This isn't about whether you're good, I continued. It's about whether you're aware. He let that settle. Because awareness is harder than generosity. Generosity feels powerful. Awareness feels vulnerable. I didn't realize I liked being the provider, he said quietly. That's human, I replied. He nodded slowly. When Dad passed, he added, I felt like I had to step into something. Now we were closer to the truth. After my husband died, My son had shifted subtly. More protective. More decisive. He had taken on responsibilities quickly, almost aggressively. Not because I asked him to. Because he thought that was what strength looked like. You didn't have to replace your father, I said gently. I know that, he replied. But I didn't want you to struggle. I wasn't struggling. He exhaled. I guess I needed to believe you were. That was the first fully honest sentence of the night. Because if I wasn't struggling, then he wasn't rescuing. And if he wasn't rescuing, then he had to redefine his role. You've already done your job, I said softly. What job? Raising yourself into a capable man. He looked at me, almost surprised. No one owes me caretaking, I continued. Not emotionally. Not financially. Especially not out of obligation. He rubbed his hands together slowly. So what happens now, he asked. There it was. The practical question. The executive brain re-engaging. What do you want to happen? I asked. He thought for a moment. I don't want to stop supporting my family, he said. You won't, I replied. But support doesn't always flow upward. He understood that immediately. The accounts in his children's names. The investments growing quietly. The money he thought was maintaining me had been strengthening the next generation. You outplayed me, he said, half smiling. I shook my head gently. This was never a game. That distinction mattered. I hadn't hidden the money to embarrass him. I hadn't redirected it to prove superiority. I did it because structure matters. If he ever faced hardship, those funds would be there. If the market shifted. If his company faltered. If life surprised him the way it surprises everyone eventually. Security doesn't announce itself. It prepares quietly. You could have told me, he said again, softer now. I wanted you to discover it, I answered. Why? Because discovered truth changes you more than delivered truth. He sat with that. The confidence he walked into dinner with was gone. But something better was forming. Balance. Do the kids know? He asked. No, and Amanda? No, he nodded. You trust me with this? Yes. That word steadied him. Because trust feels different from authority. Trust doesn't elevate. It aligns. For the first time that evening, his posture relaxed fully. Not in defeat. In recalibration. I don't want to be the kind of man who confuses money with love, he said quietly. You're not, I replied. You just needed to separate them. He leaned forward again, this time not to assert dominance, but to connect. So what should I do? He asked. And that question sounded different now. Not controlling. Learning. I looked at him carefully. Start by asking, I said. About what? About what people actually need. Not what makes you feel useful. Not what reinforces your identity. What they actually need. He nodded slowly. And in that moment, I realized something important. He hadn't whispered that question at dinner to humiliate me. He whispered it because he wanted reassurance. He wanted confirmation that he was succeeding. And now he understood. Success inside a family isn't measured in transfers. It's measured in humility. The next morning, he made a decision about the $10,000. But it wasn't the decision he thought he would make. I wake up early. Always have. Even when I lived in a larger house. Even when there were more rooms than I needed. Small spaces don't change habits. They clarify them. The morning after Thanksgiving, I made coffee in my 161 square foot apartment. And sat by the window. The sun hit the opposite building in soft gold. The room was quiet. Clean. Intentional. There is something powerful about living in a space where everything has a purpose. No excess. No performance. Just function. My phone rang around 8:15 a.m. It was him. He doesn't usually call that early unless something is urgent. Are you awake? He asked. I've been awake for hours, I replied. There was a pause on the other end. Not tension. Processing. I've been thinking, he said. I assumed you would. He exhaled softly, almost amused. I almost canceled the transfer this morning. I didn't respond immediately. Because this was important. Not the action. The reason behind it. And I asked gently. I didn't. That caught my attention more than if he had canceled it. Why not? Another pause. Because I realized something, he said. If I stop it now, it's still about me. That was growth. If he canceled it out of embarrassment, it would be ego trying to regain balance. If he continued it out of pride, it would be ego trying to maintain position. But he was starting to see the difference. I don't want the money to be a statement, he continued. I don't want it to define anything. Then don't let it, I said calmly. He was quiet again. You really invested all of it? He asked once more. Yes. And you don't need it. No, he breathed out slowly. I've been measuring myself wrong, he said. There it was. Not shame. Awareness. I thought taking care of you meant sending money, he continued. But I never asked what taking care actually looks like to you. That's because you were raised to equate provision with love, I said gently. He didn't argue, because it was true. His father worked long hours, built stability, provided security. Love was expressed through responsibility. And when his father passed, my son stepped into that blueprint automatically. But he forgot something critical. Provision is contextual. It changes when the situation changes. I don't want to overstep again, he said. You didn't overstep, I replied. You just didn't ask. There's a difference. Overstepping implies aggression. Assuming implies blindness. Blindness can be corrected. Aggression requires repair. So what do you need from me? He asked. That question mattered more than any transfer ever could. Respect, I answered. He was silent. And he prompted. Partnership, I added. Not protection. He absorbed that carefully. Because partnership requires equality. And equality can feel unfamiliar when you're used to leading. I don't see you as weak, he said quietly. I know. But I think I was afraid of you becoming weak. That was honest. Losing a parent changes how you see the other one. Mortality becomes louder. Fragility feels closer. You don't have to prepare for my decline, I said softly. Prepare for your own growth. He gave a short, reflective laugh. That sounds like something you planned, he said. I did, I replied. And I wasn't joking. Downsizing wasn't about reduction. It was about control. I chose simplicity so I would never be cornered by necessity. No mortgage. No overwhelming upkeep. No reliance. Freedom is rarely flashy. It's strategic. So here's what I'm going to do, he said. I listened. I'm going to keep the transfer for now. I didn't interrupt. But I want to restructure it. Not as support. As contribution. To what? I asked. To a family trust. Transparent. Documented. Shared. That surprised me. Not because of the idea. Because of the mindset shift. That way, he continued, it's not me carrying you. It's us building something together. There it was. Partnership. Not hierarchy. I would agree to that, I said. But only if you understand something first. What? If circumstances ever change for you, the flow reverses without shame. He didn't hesitate. Deal. And that word felt different this time. Not transactional. Aligned. I'm proud of you, I said. He didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was steadier than the night before. I think I needed this, he admitted. Yes, I said quietly. You did. Because this was never about exposing him. It was about recalibrating him. The $10,000 was never the point. The role was. And now, that role was evolving. Not from provider to dependent. Not from parent to child. But from imbalance to mutual strength. Before we hung up, he said something that mattered more than anything else. Next time, he said, I'll ask first. That's all I ever wanted. What he didn't realize yet was that someone else at that table had been listening more closely than we thought. That afternoon, I drove back to his house. Not because we had unfinished business, but because I had promised my grandchildren I would help them decorate gingerbread houses. Life doesn't pause for emotional recalibration. It continues. And growth, if it's real, has to function inside normal routines. When I arrived, the house felt different. Not physically, emotionally. My son greeted me at the door himself. That was new. Usually Amanda does. He held the door open a little longer than necessary. Not out of obligation. Out of intention. Subtle shifts matter. The children were already at the kitchen island. Icing bags everywhere. Candy scattered like confetti. Amanda was at the sink, rinsing something. She turned when I walked in. Her expression was neutral, but thoughtful. Good morning, she said gently. Good afternoon, I corrected with a small smile. There was a brief pause between us. Not awkward. Aware. I had sensed something the night before when she glanced toward us at the table. She hadn't heard the entire conversation, but she had heard enough. Later, while the kids were arguing about gumdrops, she stepped beside me quietly. I didn't mean to overhear, she said softly. You didn't, I replied. She hesitated. I just heard part of it. About the money. There it was. Not accusation. Curiosity. That must have been confusing, I said. She nodded. I always thought it was helping you. It wasn't hurting me, I answered calmly. But helping and assuming are different things. She absorbed that carefully. Amanda is intelligent. Not loud, but observant. I never wanted you to feel small, she said quietly. That sentence told me everything. She had sensed the dynamic long before I addressed it. You didn't make me feel small, I replied. But sometimes when one person carries too much responsibility, others shrink without meaning to. Her eyes softened slightly. That sounds like him, she said. Yes, I agreed. Not cruelly. Just honestly. My son has always equated leadership with control. He didn't invent that idea. He inherited it. Amanda leaned against the counter. After dinner last night, he barely slept, she admitted. That didn't surprise me. Awareness often interrupts comfort before it restores balance. He kept saying, I missed something, she continued. I smiled slightly. That's a good sign. She studied me. You're not upset with him? No, not even a little. I shook my head gently. Growth is uncomfortable, but it's necessary. She nodded slowly. I think he thought he was protecting you, she said. He was protecting an image, I replied. Of you, of himself. That landed. Because that's the quiet truth in many families. We don't just protect people. We protect roles. Provider, caretaker, strong one, independent one. But roles can become rigid. And rigidity fractures connection. Amanda was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? She said. Of course. Why didn't you tell me about the accounts? Because this question mattered. You and I are connected through him, I said gently. This wasn't about bypassing you. It was about not embarrassing him. She looked at me carefully. You were protecting him? Yes. That seemed to surprise her. He would have felt exposed, I continued. An exposure can trigger defensiveness instead of reflection. She nodded slowly. You gave him space to realize it himself. Yes. And that is the difference between correction and humiliation. Correction builds. Humiliation hardens. From across the room, my grandson yelled that his gingerbread roof had collapsed. We both turned, life pulling us back into simplicity. As we walked over, Amanda said something quietly that told me the shift was larger than just between mother and son. He told me this morning he wants to restructure the money, she said. Yes, I replied. He wants transparency. A family structure. That's wise. She looked relieved. I think he needed permission to not be the only strong one, she said. That was perceptive. Strength shared is healthier than strength hoarded. Later that evening, after the children were asleep and I was getting ready to leave, my son walked me to my car. No rush. No performance. Just walking. I talked to Amanda, he said. I assumed you would. He smiled faintly. She said you were protecting me. I was. He stopped near the driveway. I don't deserve that. That's not how protection works, I replied. It's not earned. It's offered. He looked at me for a long moment. I don't want to protect my ego anymore, he said. Good, I answered softly. Protect your family instead. He nodded. Not sharply. Steadily. The house behind him was large. Impressive. Full. But for the first time, it didn't feel like something he was trying to live up to. It felt like something he was ready to share. As I drove away, I realized something important. The money was never the real story. The whisper at dinner was never about dollars. It was about identity. And identity, once examined honestly, can either collapse or evolve. He chose evolution. What none of us expected was how the children would eventually interpret everything that had happened that weekend. A few weeks after Thanksgiving, my grandson asked me a question I wasn't prepared for. We were sitting on the floor of my apartment. He liked visiting because, as he once said, everything is close. Children don't see small spaces as limitation. They see them as accessibility. Grandma, he asked, lining up his toy cars along the window ledge. Dad said you're really good with money. Is that why you live here? I smiled slightly. What do you think? I asked him. He shrugged. I think you don't waste stuff. That answer was more accurate than he realized. I don't waste things, I agreed. Not food. Not time. Not money. He nodded, satisfied with that. But later that evening, when my granddaughter came into the kitchen while I was washing dishes, she said something that told me the ripple had reached deeper. Dad said you helped him understand something, she said. Oh, I asked casually. He said you don't need rescuing. Children hear more than adults assume. Yes, I said gently. That's true. She leaned against the counter. I think he thought he had to be the hero. That word stayed with me. Hero. It's a role many people adopt without realizing the cost. Heroes often need someone else to be fragile. And sometimes, fragility gets projected onto the nearest safe person. Being strong doesn't mean someone else has to be weak, I told her. She nodded thoughtfully. I think Dad gets that now. That was the real shift. Not the trust. Not the accounts. Understanding. A few days later, My son invited me to a meeting. Not formal, but intentional. He, Amanda, and I sat at their dining table, the same one where he had whispered weeks earlier. But the energy was different. No tension, no measuring. He had paperwork in front of him. I spoke with our advisor, he said. Not my advisor. Our. Language matters. He explained that he had formally created a family trust. Transparent, structured, documented. The funds I had invested were included, with acknowledgement. Not as a secret, not as a surprise, but as collaboration. I don't want this to feel like you did something behind my back, he said. It wasn't behind your back, I replied calmly. It was ahead of your awareness. He smiled slightly at that. Amanda spoke next. We want the kids to understand money differently than we did, she said. How so? I asked. Not as leverage, not as proof, as responsibility. That told me the recalibration wasn't temporary. It was systemic. My son looked at me. I kept thinking about what you said, he admitted. About generosity turning into hierarchy. I waited. I don't want my kids thinking financial support equals authority, he continued. I don't want them believing love is measured in dollars. That was the deeper outcome of that Thanksgiving whisper. It wasn't about correcting him. It was about preventing repetition. Cycles are powerful, unless someone interrupts them. I'm proud of you, I said quietly. He didn't deflect this time. Thank you, he replied. There was something grounded in his tone. Not defensive, not performative. Grounded. Over the next month, I noticed subtle changes. He asked more questions. Not just about finances. About how I was feeling. About what I was reading. About whether I needed anything. And when I said no, he accepted it. No persuasion. No insistence. Respect. Amanda relaxed too. There was less undercurrent in the room when we were all together. Less unspoken tension. Because when hierarchy dissolves, everyone breathes easier. One evening, my son called me again. Not early. Not urgent. Just to talk. I've been thinking about something, he said. Go on. When I whispered that question at dinner, I wasn't trying to test you. I know. I think I was testing myself. That was honest. He needed confirmation that he was succeeding in his role. And when I didn't respond the way he expected, it forced him to examine what success meant. Sometimes, I said softly, the people we try hardest to protect are the ones we learn the most from. He was quiet for a moment. I thought I had everything structured, he admitted. But I missed something. What was that? That strength doesn't require control. That sentence alone made the entire weekend worth it. Because understanding that early changes a life trajectory. I still live in 161 square feet. I still wake up early. I still drink coffee by the window. Nothing dramatic changed. And that's the point. Real change rarely looks dramatic from the outside. It looks like calmer conversations. Balanced roles. Less ego in the room. The whisper at Thanksgiving could have stayed what it was. A subtle assertion. A quiet measurement. Instead, it became a pivot. Not because I fought it, but because I didn't. Months later, something happened that proved the lesson had truly taken root. And it wasn't about money at all. It was about restraint. It was about choice. And it happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. My son called me during work hours, which he rarely does. Do you have a minute? He asked. I always have a minute, I replied. He sounded composed. Not stressed. Not hurried. But deliberate. I almost did something today, he said. I waited. There's a new opportunity at work. A big one. It would mean relocating. Bigger house. Bigger position. Bigger everything. He paused. Bigger ego? I asked gently. He laughed under his breath. Maybe. He explained that the offer came with a significant salary increase. Expanded authority. A team of nearly twice the size. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have hesitated. He would have said yes immediately. Because upward always felt like forward. But this time he paused. Before I answered, he said, I asked myself something. What? I asked. Am I choosing this because it aligns with my life? Or because it reinforces my identity? That question mattered. Because it was the same question hidden inside that Thanksgiving whisper. Was he sending money because I needed it? Or because it confirmed who he believed he was? I didn't know how to answer at first, he admitted. Take your time, I said. I realized, he continued slowly, that I've been equating expansion with value. Bigger office, bigger income, bigger influence, but not necessarily deeper connection. And what does Amanda think? I asked. She asked me one question, he replied, which was, do you want to grow, or do you want to prove? That stopped him, because proving is exhausting. Growth is quieter. 6 months ago, I would have taken it, he said, without asking anyone. And now I'm not sure bigger is better. That sentence told me the recalibration had stabilized. This wasn't about shrinking ambition. It was about refining it. What would relocating cost? I asked. He didn't misunderstand the question. Time, he answered immediately. Energy. Presence. He has 2 young children. Amanda has her own work she values. They just restructured their financial foundation. Relocating would mean disruption. Not necessarily negative, but significant. I don't want to build something impressive that disconnects me from the people it's supposed to benefit, he said. That sentence was not the voice of the man who whispered at Thanksgiving. That was someone who had examined his blueprint. So what are you leaning toward? I asked. I'm thinking of declining it. I didn't react emotionally. I simply asked why. Because I don't want to confuse growth with escalation. There it was again. Clarity. He had begun questioning default patterns. Upward mobility. Financial display. Silent hierarchy. And that question extended beyond money. It reshaped decision-making. A few days later, he and Amanda invited me to dinner. Nothing formal. Just the 4 of us after the kids went to bed. He had made his decision. I turned it down, he said. No drama. No regret. I asked for something different instead, he continued. What? I asked. More flexibility. Same role, but autonomy over schedule. He negotiated for presence instead of prestige. That was evolution. How did that feel? I asked. Strange, he admitted. Why? Because it didn't look impressive on paper. I smiled slightly. Does everything have to? He shook his head. No. Amanda reached for his hand at the table. I think we all thought success had a specific shape, she said. Large, loud, visible. And now? I asked. Now it feels balanced, she replied. That word again. Balance. The same thing that shifted the night of Thanksgiving. Later, as I was getting ready to leave, my son walked me to the door. You know, he said, I used to think providing meant making sure no one ever struggled. And now? I asked. Now I think it means making sure no one feels smaller, so I can feel bigger. That was the quiet victory. Not the trust. Not the investments. Not the restructuring. Perspective. Months ago, he measured love in transfers. Now he measured it in presence. He no longer needed to be the strongest person in the room. He just needed to be steady. As I drove home that night, I realized something simple. The lesson had expanded beyond our relationship. It was influencing his parenting, his marriage, his career. Not because I lectured him, but because I allowed him to confront himself. And that's the part people misunderstand. Correction doesn't require confrontation. Sometimes it requires patience. And sometimes it begins with a whisper. But the real test came when the market shifted, and for the first time, the roles nearly reversed. It started quietly. Headlines first. Then conversations. Then restructuring. My son works in finance. When the market trembles, his world feels it immediately. One evening, he called me later than usual. His voice was steady, but thinner. Mom, he said, I might need to make some adjustments. I didn't interrupt. When the company expands too quickly, it corrects quickly, he continued. We're restructuring. Bonuses are frozen. Some departments are being consolidated. Are you safe? I asked calmly. For now, he answered. For now? 2 words that carry more weight than most people admit. 6 months ago, this news would have triggered something sharp inside him. A need to control, to compensate, to assert. But this time, he sounded measured. I've been reviewing everything, he said. Liquidity, risk exposure, timeline projections. That was his language. But beneath it, I heard something else. Humility. Do you need anything from me? I asked. He paused. That question would have insulted him a year ago. Now, it made him think. I don't think so, he said carefully. But I wanted you to know. Transparency, not performance. That mattered. A week later, the situation clarified. His role wasn't eliminated, but his compensation shifted. Performance-based bonuses were deferred. Long-term incentives postponed. Stable, but uncertain. He and Amanda adjusted quickly, reduced discretionary spending, paused a renovation plan, restructured some investments. No panic, just recalibration. One Sunday afternoon, he came to my apartment alone. Not for a holiday, not for an event, just to sit. He looked around the small space again. But this time, not with evaluation, with understanding. I get it now, he said. Get what? I asked. Margin. He gestured lightly around the room. You built margin into your life. Not just financial margin. Emotional margin. Spatial margin. Decision margin. I didn't want to be dependent on circumstances, I replied. He nodded slowly. I thought scale protected me, he admitted. Scale amplifies, I corrected gently. It doesn't always protect. He sat down across from me at the small table. For the first time, he said, I understand what you meant about security not being about income. Security isn't what comes in. It's what remains steady when what comes in shifts. Are you afraid? I asked him. He thought about it. A little, he admitted. That honesty alone told me how far he had come. Fear acknowledged is healthier than fear disguised as control. What's the fear? I asked. Letting my family down. There it was again. The provider reflex. I don't want them to feel instability, he continued. Instability is part of life, I said calmly. Hiding it teaches fragility. Navigating it teaches resilience. He absorbed that. Because this moment was the true reversal. Not financial. Psychological. He wasn't rescuing me. And I wasn't rescuing him. We were standing level. About the trust, he said after a moment. Yes. If things tighten more, I might need to pause contributions. That's why structures exist, I replied evenly. No shame. No shame. He exhaled. The exhale of someone who expected judgment and found none. You meant it, he said quietly. About flow reversing. Yes. Family support isn't vertical. It's circular. He leaned back in his chair. For a long time, he said, I thought strength meant never needing help. And now, I think strength means not collapsing when help is available. That sentence carried more maturity than any promotion ever could. The market continued shifting over the next few months. Nothing catastrophic. Just pressure. And under pressure, character reveals itself. He didn't escalate his spending to prove stability. He didn't double down on appearances. He simplified. He communicated with Amanda openly. He explained age-appropriate pieces to the children. Not fearfully, factually. And one evening, he called me again. Thank you, he said. For what? For not letting me build my identity on something fragile. I smiled slightly. You built it, I replied. I just held up a mirror. There was a long pause. I used to think your 161 square foot apartment meant you had less, he admitted. And now I think it means you need less. That distinction mattered. Because needing less makes you harder to destabilize. As the months passed, his situation stabilized again. Markets correct. Cycles move. But something permanent had already shifted. He no longer measured his worth in upward graphs. He measured it in steadiness under pressure. And that is a different kind of wealth. It's about the turkey. I read the message twice. Then a third time. The words didn't change. My fork was still hovering above my plate. Across the table, my father was slicing another piece, steady and precise like he did every year. He took pride in carving it perfectly. Golden skin. Clean cuts. No tearing. He'd been doing it the same way since I was a kid. Nothing about it looked wrong. But my appetite was gone. I lowered my fork slowly and set it down. No sudden movements. No panic. Just stillness. My mother noticed first. You're really not eating, she said, half teasing. Are you on some new diet I don't know about? A few people laughed. I forced a small smile. Just not that hungry yet. That wasn't true. I had been starving 10 minutes ago. My phone felt heavy in my lap. I slid it out just enough to reread the thread under the table. Don't eat anything. Please. Not a bite. You don't know me. I'm trying to help you. It's about the turkey. No emojis. No threats. No explanation. Just urgency. I typed 3 words. Why the turkey? I hesitated before sending it. Once I did, there was no taking it back. The message delivered instantly. Which meant the phone was on. Which meant whoever this was waiting. I locked my screen again and looked up. My cousin reached across me for the gravy boat, brushing my elbow. You okay? You look pale. I'm fine, I said. Another lie. My pulse was still uneven. If something was wrong with the turkey, wouldn't someone else taste it first? My father already had. My brother too. Unless it wasn't about poisoning. Unless it was about something else. Undercooked? Contaminated? Allergic reaction? I tried to think rationally. Earlier that afternoon, I had seen the turkey resting on the counter while everyone moved in and out of the kitchen. Kids running through. Doors opening. People bringing side dishes. Too many hands. Too much movement. But that wasn't unusual for Thanksgiving. My phone vibrated again. I nearly jumped. I glanced down. Was it in the fridge all night? My chest tightened. That was specific. I hadn't even asked that. I slowly lifted my eyes toward my mother. She was pouring wine for my aunt. Mom, I said casually, trying to keep my tone even. When did you take the turkey out? She didn't look up. Late morning. What? Just wondering. She smiled. Relax. I know how to cook a turkey. Everyone chuckled lightly. Heat crept up my neck. Now I felt ridiculous. Paranoid. What if this was some prank? But then why the detailed question? Was it in the fridge all night? That implied doubt. Storage temperature. Food safety. My father cleared his throat. It was thawed properly, he said, overhearing. I checked it yesterday. Yesterday. Not last night. That minute had been out longer than overnight. My phone buzzed again. Ask if anyone else handled it. The room felt smaller. I swallowed. Did anyone help with it this morning? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. My sister raised her hand jokingly. I basted it once. Why? Did I ruin it? No, I said quickly. My brother leaned back in his chair. You're acting weird. I'm just curious, I replied. Curious wasn't the word. Cornered was closer. I checked the thread again. A new message appeared before I could type. Someone didn't wash their hands. A chill ran through me. Now this sounded less dramatic. Less like sabotage. More like contamination. And somehow, that scared me more. Because accidents were harder to trace. I scanned the table. My niece was licking cranberry sauce off her fingers. My aunt was coughing lightly after laughing. Normal holiday noise. But what if symptoms wouldn't show immediately? What if this was the calm before something worse? I leaned toward my brother slightly. How do you feel? He blinked. About what? Just in general. He laughed. Fine. What? I shook my head. Nothing. I felt absurd. Yet I couldn't shake the tension in my chest. Another vibration. This one longer. I braced myself before reading it. I work at the grocery store where it was bought. My breath caught. You bought it Wednesday afternoon. That was true. I had been there when my dad picked it up. We had a recall this morning. The words blurred for a second. Recall. My heart thudded. No one could reach customers in time. I stared at the screen. If this was real, why message me directly? How did they get my number? As if anticipating the question, another text came in. I saw you put your number down for the rewards program. That was also true. I remembered typing it in. The room was suddenly too loud. Or maybe too quiet. I couldn't tell anymore. My father cut another slice and placed it onto my plate without asking. There, he said proudly. Best one yet. I looked at it. Steam rising gently. Perfectly cooked. Potentially dangerous. My phone vibrated one more time. Checked the brand label. I slowly stood. Up. All eyes turned toward me. Bathroom, I said quickly. No one questioned it. I walked toward the kitchen instead. Each step felt deliberate. Measured. Behind me, the laughter resumed. Forks scraped plates. Glasses clinked. Normal. Everything still looked normal. I reached the trash bin near the counter. On top of crumpled foil and vegetable peels was the plastic wrapping from the turkey. My hand hovered over it. For a split second, I considered turning back. Pretending I'd never seen the messages. Sitting down. Taking a bite. Letting the night continue. But my phone buzzed again. And this time, the message was short. Please hurry. Please hurry. I didn't move for a second. The trash bin was right in front of me. The kitchen lights felt harsher than before, almost clinical. Too bright. Too exposing. Behind me, I could still hear the table. My dad's voice. My aunt laughing again. Silverware scraping plates. Normal. Everything was still normal. I reached into the trash. The plastic wrapping was crumpled, but mostly intact. My hands shook slightly as I pulled it free and flattened it against the counter. Brand name. Wait. Sell-by date. I scanned it quickly, then slower. My phone buzzed again in my other hand. Check the establishment number. I looked back at the label. Tiny printed text near the USDA stamp. EST 4821. I typed it into the message thread. The reply came almost instantly. Not that one. My chest tightened. I flipped the plastic over. There was a second code, partially hidden by a grease smear. EST 9137. I stared at it. My phone vibrated. That's it. My throat went dry. What does that mean? I typed. A pause this time. Longer than before. In the dining room, someone turned on music. Soft, instrumental holiday jazz. The kind that's meant to feel comforting. It didn't. My phone lit up again. Batch contamination. Possible salmonella exposure. We were notified at 3 p.m. Corporate hasn't reached everyone yet. 3 p.m. It was almost 7 now. For hours. For hours of silence. I looked toward the hallway leading back to the table. My niece's voice floated in. She was asking for more stuffing. Salmonella. Not immediate. Not dramatic. But dangerous enough. Especially for my father. He had been dealing with stomach issues all year. And my aunt. She was on medication that weakened her immune system. My heart started pounding again. Are you sure? I typed. Yes. That was all they wrote. No dramatic warning. No extra explanation. Just certainty. I leaned against the counter and tried to think clearly. If I walked back in there and announced that the turkey might be contaminated, what would happen? Panic. Accusations. Embarrassment. My mom would feel attacked. My dad would insist everything was fine. And if it turned out to be wrong, I would ruin Thanksgiving over a stranger's text. My phone buzzed again. I shouldn't have used my personal number. I could get in trouble. But I saw your purchase. I remembered your face. That made me pause. You remembered my face? You joked with your dad about overcooking it. I was stocking the freezer aisle. I did remember that. My dad had made a comment about dry turkey, and I'd teased him about setting 3 timers. The memory was too specific to be random. This wasn't someone guessing. This was someone who had been there. You need to tell them. The next message read. I exhaled slowly. From the dining room, my brother called out. You alive in there? Yeah, I answered quickly. Just washing my hands. Not technically a lie. My palms were damp. I looked at the label again. EST 9137. Batch number printed beneath it. I took a photo with my phone. Send me the batch number, the stranger texted. I did. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then, that's the recall batch. The words felt heavier than before. Real. Specific. No ambiguity. I imagined my dad finishing his plate. My aunt asking for leftovers to take home. My niece waking up sick in the middle of the night. The image hit harder than I expected. I couldn't just sit down and pretend anymore. But I also couldn't storm in there like an alarm bell. I needed to handle this calmly. Controlled. I grabbed a paper towel and wiped my hands slowly, buying time. Then I picked up the turkey platter from the counter, the extra slices that hadn't been served yet. I walked back toward the dining room. Every step felt louder than it should have. When I entered, everyone looked up. My father smiled. There you are. We thought you fell in. I forced a small smile. Hey, I said, keeping my voice steady. Before anyone takes seconds, can we pause for a minute? The room shifted slightly. Confusion. Mild irritation. What's wrong? My mom asked. I set the platter down carefully. I just checked something, I said. The turkey's establishment number matches a recall notice from today. Silence. Not loud silence, but sharp. My brother blinked. What? It might be contaminated. I continued evenly. Salmonella risk. I'm not saying it definitely is, but the batch number matches. My father straightened in his chair. Where did you hear that? I got a message from someone who works at the store, I said. No dramatics. No panic. Just facts. My aunt lowered her fork slowly. You're serious? She asked. I checked the label, I replied. It's the same establishment number and batch. No one moved for a moment. Then my mother stood up. Okay, she said quietly. Then we don't take chances. Her voice wasn't defensive. It was firm. Relief washed over me unexpectedly. My father hesitated, looking at his half-finished plate. Then he nodded once. Better safe than sorry. My brother pushed his plate away. My niece looked confused. Is the turkey bad? It might not be, my mom said gently. But we're going to switch to ham instead. The tension in my chest loosened just slightly. No yelling. No blame. Just adjustment. My phone vibrated again in my pocket. I didn't look at it immediately. Instead, I watched my mother carry the turkey back into the kitchen. Her shoulders were tense. But she didn't argue. She didn't question me in front of everyone. That mattered. Only then did I glance at my phone. One new message. Thank you. I stared at the words. Thank you. Not, I told you. Not see, just gratitude. I typed back slowly. You might have just saved Thanksgiving. The reply came after a short pause. I just didn't want anyone getting hurt. I looked around the table. Plates pushed aside. Conversations restarting carefully. The mood slightly shaken, but intact. No one was sick. Not yet. And hopefully not at all. But as I slipped my phone back into my pocket, one question still lingered quietly in the back of my mind. If the store knew at 3, why hadn't they called? And how many other families were still eating? The turkey was finally on the table. Golden. Perfect. Exactly the way David liked it when he was a boy. The smell of rosemary and butter filled my small dining room. but I couldn't taste anything anymore. My appetite had vanished the moment that message lit up my phone. Don't eat anything. Trust me. I slipped the phone into my cardigan pocket and forced myself to breathe normally. Across from me, my daughter-in-law, Emily, was pouring cranberry sauce into a crystal bowl I had inherited from my mother. Her movements were precise. Calm. Too calm. Mom, you okay? David asked, slicing into the turkey. I nodded. Just a little tired. I've always been good at lying when it protects someone else's comfort. It's a skill mothers develop early. But as I watched them, something inside me began rearranging old memories, like puzzle pieces clicking into place. And suddenly, this message didn't feel random. It felt connected. I thought back to last Christmas. Emily had insisted on hosting. She said my house was too small, now that their friends joined every holiday. I remember standing in her kitchen, watching her move me gently out of the way. Oh, don't worry about the gravy, she had said. We've got it covered. We. Not you. Not Mom. I had laughed it off then. But later that night, I overheard her whispering to one of her friends near the wine rack. She still insists on cooking like she's feeding a farm, Emily said softly. It's sweet, but unnecessary. Unnecessary. That word stung more now than it had then. Then there was my medication incident 3 months ago. I have mild hypertension. Nothing dramatic. Just pills I take every morning with orange juice. One Tuesday, I noticed my prescription bottle was lighter than it should have been. I counted twice. 12 pills missing. I convinced myself I must have miscounted. Maybe I'd taken extra by mistake. But later that week, Emily had casually asked at dinner, "Do you ever feel dizzy after meals, Mom? Like your blood pressure drops?" At the time, I thought she was being considerate. Now, the question felt different. Calculated. David carved the turkey with confident strokes. "Mom, try this," he said, placing a slice onto my plate. The meat looked tender, juicy, perfect. And suddenly I remembered something else. 2 weeks ago, Emily had called me out of nowhere. "Mom, what spices do you use in your stuffing?" she asked brightly. I told her. She paused. "Oh, that's interesting. I was thinking of trying something new this year." Something new. I glanced at the stuffing bowl now. It looked darker than usual. More herbs. Maybe more sage. Or something else. My heart thudded harder. Across the table, Emily lifted her wine glass. "To family," she said smoothly. "To family," David echoed. I raised mine too. But I didn't drink. And I didn't eat. Instead, I let my mind keep working. For the past year, David had been more involved in my finances than I liked. After my husband passed 3 years ago, David offered to help manage things. "Just to make sure no one takes advantage of you, Mom." I'd trusted him. Of course I had. He had access to my checking account now. Just for emergencies. Last month, I'd noticed a $2,800 withdrawal I didn't remember making. When I asked, David said gently, "Oh, that was for the home insurance renewal." I handled it. I hadn't questioned him. I didn't want to seem forgetful. But now I wondered, had I ever seen that invoice? The stranger's message replayed in my head. Don't eat anything. Trust me. Who would know something like this? Who would care enough to warn me? And how did they have my number? Unless this wasn't random at all. Unless someone inside this family felt guilty, or scared, or trapped. Emily began serving herself a generous portion of stuffing. David took mashed potatoes. They both started eating. Normal. Relaxed. If there was something wrong with the food, why were they eating it? Unless the warning wasn't about poison. Unless it was about something else. Something that wouldn't harm them. Only me. My mind flashed to my medication again. Blood pressure. Sodium. Interactions. What if something had been added that could spike my pressure? Or drop it dangerously low? Something subtle. Something that would look like a natural medical episode. At 67, people expect health scares. They don't question them. I folded my napkin carefully. "Actually," I said, keeping my voice light, "I'm not feeling very hungry tonight." David frowned. "But Mom, you barely ate lunch." "I know. Must be nerves." Emily's fork paused midair. Just for half a second. Then she smiled. "Well, at least try the stuffing. I made it just for you." There it was again. That emphasis. Just for you. My pulse roared in my ears. I excused myself and walked slowly to the kitchen. Once alone, I pulled out my phone. The number that had texted me was unfamiliar. No name. No photo. I typed quickly. "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Then, "Check your pill bottle. The one in the bathroom cabinet." Not the kitchen. My stomach dropped. The kitchen cabinet. That's where I keep my daily pill organizer. The bathroom cabinet. That's where the original prescription bottle sits. I hadn't looked at it in days. Slowly, I walked down the hallway. Each step felt heavier. Behind me, I could hear laughter from the dining room. Forks clinking. Wine glasses touching. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. But something wasn't safe. Not tonight. I opened the bathroom cabinet. Reached for the white bottle. My hands were shaking now. The label was still mine. My name. My dosage. But when I opened it, the pills inside were a different shade. Slightly darker. And there were more than there should have been. My breath caught. I don't cry easily. But in that moment, I felt something break open inside my chest. Not fear. Not yet. But clarity. Someone had switched my medication. And suddenly, the stranger's message wasn't mysterious anymore. It was a warning. And the question wasn't whether something was wrong. The question was, who in my own family had done this? And how far were they willing to go? I stood there in my bathroom, staring at the pills in my hand. Same bottle. Same label. Different contents. My reflection in the mirror looked older than it had an hour ago. Not weaker. Just awake. From the dining room, I could still hear David laughing. Emily's voice followed. Light, melodic, effortless. Like nothing in the world was wrong. I closed the pill bottle slowly and slipped it into my robe pocket. Then my phone vibrated again. Another message from the unknown number. Do not confront them yet. My heart pounded. Who are you? I typed again. This time, the reply took longer. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then, someone who works in the pharmacy. I froze. Pharmacy. My prescription had been refilled last week. David had offered to pick it up for me. You shouldn't be driving in that rain, Mom. I'll grab it after work. I had thanked him. Of course I had. Another message came through before I could respond. The refill wasn't processed through your insurance. It was replaced in store. My knees felt weak. Replaced. Which meant the original. Medication had never even reached me. Which meant this wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. I walked back toward the dining room slowly, steadying my breath before I stepped inside. Emily glanced up immediately. You okay, Mom? Her eyes were searching my face. Not with concern. With assessment. I smiled gently. Just needed some air. I returned to my seat, but didn't touch the food. David wiped his mouth with a napkin. You sure you're not coming down with something? The irony of that question almost made me laugh. Maybe, I said softly. Hard to tell these days. I let my gaze linger on him a second longer than usual. He looked away first. After dinner, Emily insisted on packing leftovers for me. I made extra so you wouldn't have to cook tomorrow, she said sweetly. I watched her spoon stuffing into a plastic container. The same stuffing she had urged me to eat. Thank you, I replied. My voice was calm, even warm. Because tonight wasn't about emotion. It was about information. An hour later, when they finally left, I locked the door behind them and leaned against it. The house was silent again. But it wasn't the hollow silence from before. It was different. It was charged. I walked straight to the kitchen sink and dumped the leftover stuffing down the disposal. Then I placed the pill bottle on the table. Under the bright light. Studied it. The stranger's messages replayed in my mind. Someone from the pharmacy. Someone who had seen something wrong. Why would they risk texting me? Unless they had already tried to fix it quietly. And failed. My phone buzzed again. I couldn't say anything at the counter. He was there. David. I swallowed hard. What did you see? I typed. The reply came slower this time. He asked if there was a generic option. Said cost was an issue. Cost. My medication is covered almost fully by Medicare. There would have been no issue. Another message followed. When I told him no change was needed, he stepped aside and made a phone call. Came back 20 minutes later with a different request. My pulse quickened. He asked if we carried supplements with similar-looking tablets. I felt the air leave my lungs. Supplements. Different pills. Similar appearance. Easily swapped. And perfectly explainable if something went wrong. She must have mixed up her pills. She's getting forgetful. She's older now. I could already hear the narrative forming. Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I've spent 67 years learning that tears rarely solve anything. Facts do. Proof does. Patience does. Why are you telling me this? I asked finally. There was a long pause before the response came. Because my mother is 72, and I would want someone to tell her. I pressed my hand to my mouth. For the first time that night, I didn't feel alone. Someone out there, someone who didn't owe me anything, had chosen to protect me, when my own son might not have. I sank into my kitchen chair and let the weight of everything settle. David had access to my accounts. David had picked up my prescription. Emily had insisted on cooking. Emily had asked about dizziness. Individually, each detail was small. Together, they formed something ugly, something deliberate, and something I wasn't ready to confront head-on. Not yet. Because if they were willing to switch my medication, what else were they willing to do? My phone buzzed once more. Please be careful, and don't mention this to anyone yet. I typed back slowly. I won't. Thank you. After a moment, I added, you may have saved my life. The reply was simple. Just promise me you'll protect yourself. I stared at that message for a long time. Protect myself. It sounded strange. For decades, my job had been protecting my child. Now, it seemed, I had to protect myself from him. I stood up and walked to my bedroom. Opened the small lockbox in my closet. Inside were copies of my bank statements, property deed, and my late husband's will. Tomorrow, I would call my lawyer. Tomorrow, I would ask questions about account access. Tomorrow, I would request a full medication review from my doctor. But tonight I would pretend. Because sometimes the strongest move isn't confrontation. It's preparation. I placed the altered pill bottle back into the bathroom cabinet exactly where it had been. And I set my phone on the nightstand. The house was quiet again. But this time, I wasn't the one in the dark. They were. And they had no idea that someone had just stepped into my corner. And that everything they thought was under control was no longer under their control at all. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind wouldn't stop working. When you reach my age, you learn something important. Panic wastes energy. Clarity saves it. At 6:15 the next morning, I made my coffee the same way I always do. 2 teaspoons of ground beans. 8 ounces of water. No sugar. Routine is power. If anyone was watching me, I wanted them to see the same woman they saw yesterday. Predictable. Aging. Harmless. I took my usual seat by the kitchen window and opened my banking app on my phone. David's name was still listed as an authorized viewer. Viewer. Such an innocent word. I scrolled through the last 6 months carefully. Slowly. $2,800. Insurance. $1,150. Home maintenance. $3,400. Transfer labeled medical coordination. Medical coordination. I don't have coordinated medical care. I have a primary care doctor and a cardiologist I see twice a year. My fingers felt steady as I took screenshots of every transaction. Evidence first. Emotion later. At 9 a.m., I called my bank. My voice was calm. I'd like to remove authorized access from my account, I said. The representative asked if I was sure. Yes, I replied. It's no longer necessary. It took less than 5 minutes. 5 minutes to close a door my son thought would always be open. I didn't call him to explain. Not yet. Next, I called my doctor's office. I'd like to schedule a medication review, I told the nurse. She asked if I was experiencing side effects. I paused. Possibly, I said. I just want to confirm the pills I have match my prescription. She fit me in for Thursday morning. 3 days away. That was fine. I had time. Around noon, my phone rang. David. I stared at his name on the screen for 3 full rings before answering. Hi, sweetheart. His tone was light. Too light. Morning, Mom. How are you feeling today? Oh, much better, I said warmly. Must have just been tired last night. A pause. Did you eat after we left? He asked casually. There it was. The subtle check-in. The monitoring. I had some toast before bed, I lied. Another pause. Good, he said. Good. Not relieved. Not concerned. Just good. I was thinking, I added gently. Maybe I should start handling my prescriptions myself again. You're so busy. Silence. Then a soft chuckle. Mom, I don't mind helping. I know, but it makes me feel independent. That word matters to men like David. Independence sounds like pride, not suspicion. If that's what you want, he said slowly. It is. Another door closing. Quietly. That afternoon, I drove myself to the pharmacy. The same young woman from the texts was behind the counter. She couldn't have been more than 30. When she saw me, her expression shifted, not alarm, not guilt. Relief. I'd like to refill this, I said, placing the altered bottle on the counter. She scanned it. Her jaw tightened just slightly. This isn't our stock, she said carefully. I know. We didn't look at each other directly, but the understanding between us was clear. She disappeared into the back and returned with a sealed, properly labeled bottle. "This is your actual prescription," she said quietly. I nodded. "And the other one?" Her voice lowered. "You should dispose of it." Dispose. Such a simple word. I slid the fake bottle back into my purse instead. "Thank you," I said. She met my eyes this time. "Be careful." On the drive home, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't even feel shock anymore. What I felt was something colder. Calculation. If David and Emily thought I was vulnerable, that assumption would become my advantage. That evening, Emily texted, "Hope you're feeling better today, 2 hearts a pink heart." I stared at it for a long time. Then I replied, "Much better. Thank you for dinner." The stuffing was delicious. I could almost imagine her smile reading that. Let her feel safe. Let them both feel confident. Because people only reveal everything when they believe they've already won. At 7:30 p.m., I opened my lockbox again. This time, I removed something I hadn't looked at in years. My husband's updated will. There was a clause in it most people didn't know about, including David. A clause regarding financial misconduct or coercion. If any beneficiary was found manipulating or endangering the surviving spouse for financial gain, they forfeited their inheritance. Completely. My husband had insisted on that clause after watching his own sister get taken advantage of late in life. Just in case, he'd said. I remember laughing at the time. We trusted our son. We believed in the way we raised him. But trust doesn't erase human weakness. And greed doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks helpful. Responsible. Protective. I closed the document carefully. Tomorrow, I would call my attorney. Not to accuse. Not yet. But to ask questions. To prepare. Because if my son had crossed a line this dangerous, then this wasn't about one Thanksgiving dinner. It was about something bigger. And I needed to know exactly how deep it went. As I turned off the lights that night, I felt something steady inside me. Not fear. Not anger. Control. They thought I was aging into confusion. They thought small changes wouldn't be noticed. They thought silence meant weakness. They were wrong. And they still had no idea that the game had shifted. And this time, I was the one planning the next move. Thursday morning arrived colder than expected. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones before winter officially begins. I dressed carefully for my doctor's appointment. Navy sweater, gray slacks, pearl earrings my husband gave me on our 40th anniversary. Armor doesn't always look like steel. Sometimes it looks like dignity. At 9:10 a.m., I was sitting on the paper-covered exam table while Dr. Harris reviewed my chart. He's been my primary physician for over 15 years. He knew my husband. He attended the funeral. He knows my baseline. "What seems to be the concern?" he asked gently. I placed both pill bottles on the counter beside him. "This one," I said, pointing to the sealed, correct prescription, "is what I'm supposed to take." Then I tapped the altered one. "And this one is what I've been taking." He opened the second bottle first. His expression changed almost immediately. "These aren't your prescribed tablets," he said quietly. "I know." He walked to the light, examining one more closely. "These look like over-the-counter supplements. Potassium and herbal extract. In high doses, this combination could interfere with blood pressure regulation. Not lethal, not dramatic, but dangerous enough. Dangerous enough to cause dizziness, confusion, irregular readings. Enough to make a 67-year-old woman appear unstable. "Have you experienced symptoms?" he asked. "Some lightheadedness after meals," I replied calmly. "Nothing extreme." He nodded slowly. "Who picked up your last refill?" There it was. The question I knew was coming. "My son," I said. Silence filled the room. Doctors are trained not to jump to conclusions. But he didn't need to. The evidence was in his hand. "I'll document this," Dr. Harris said carefully. "And I recommend you file a formal report with the pharmacy." I nodded. "I may need that documentation later." His eyes met mine. There was concern there. And something else. Respect. "You're handling this very calmly," he said. "I raised a child," I replied softly. Calm is a skill. When I left the office, I didn't drive home immediately. Instead, I sat in my car for several minutes. Hands on the steering wheel. Breathing. Because confirmation changes something inside you. Suspicion is one thing. Proof is another. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't paranoia. This was deliberate. That afternoon, I called my attorney. Mr. Whitaker had drafted my husband's will and helped with estate planning years ago. "I'd like to review beneficiary conditions," I told his assistant. I didn't say why. Not over the phone. My appointment was set for Monday. For days away. Enough time to observe. That evening, David called again. Mom, you busy? Just making tea, I said. How'd the doctor visit go? Direct. Too direct. Routine, I answered. He adjusted my dosage slightly. Another lie. I hated lying to my son. But truth is earned. And right now, he hadn't earned it. That's good, he said. You know, Em and I were talking. Maybe we should look into assisted living options down the road. Just planning ahead. There it was. The real direction of this. Assisted living. Structured environment. Medical oversight. Financial consolidation. I'm not there yet, I said evenly. Of course not, Mom. Just thinking long term. Long term for whom? After we hung up, I replayed the conversation carefully. They needed me medically unstable. Or at least medically questionable. If I appeared forgetful, confused, inconsistent with medication, it would justify concern. Concern justifies control. Control justifies decisions made for my own good. Including property. Including accounts. Including inheritance acceleration. I'd seen similar stories on the news before. Elder financial exploitation doesn't start with theft. It starts with subtle undermining. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Emily showed up unannounced. She stood on my porch holding a small basket. I made you soup, she said brightly. Homemade. Thoughtful. Calculated. I invited her in. We sat at the kitchen table. She watched me closely as I tasted the broth. I swallowed. Smiled. Delicious. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. You know, she began casually. David worries about you living alone. I manage just fine. Of course you do. But things can change quickly at our age. Our age. I'm 67. She's 39. I almost laughed. Then she said something that made everything click into place. You left your stove on last week after dinner, she said gently. I stared at her. No, I didn't. She tilted her head sympathetically. It happens, Mom. We just want to make sure you're safe. Gaslighting. Planting doubt. Creating a narrative of decline. And she expected me to argue emotionally. To defend myself loudly. To appear reactive. Instead, I nodded slowly. I appreciate your concern. Her eyes flickered. She wasn't expecting that. After she left, I checked my stove knobs carefully. All in perfect working order. Of course they were. The lie wasn't meant for me. It was meant for future documentation. Mom admitted she forgets. Mom acknowledged safety issues. Small statements that grow into official records. If I hadn't been warned, if I hadn't known about the medication, I might have started doubting myself. That's the cruelest part. Not the pills. Not the money. The attempt to rewrite my reality. That night, I placed all documents from my doctor into a separate folder. Bank screenshots in another. Pharmacy receipt in a third. Evidence doesn't shout. It waits. And for the first time since Thanksgiving dinner, I felt something stronger than anger. Resolve. Because this was no longer just about betrayal. It was about preservation. They believed I was slowly losing control. They were wrong. I was gaining it. And they still had no idea how much I now understood. But they would. Very soon. Monday came faster than I expected. I arrived at Mr. Whitaker's office 10 minutes early. Old habits. My husband used to say punctuality reveals character. The receptionist smiled politely and offered coffee. I declined. My hands were steady enough already. When I stepped into Mr. Whitaker's office, he stood to greet me. Good to see you, he said warmly. What can I help you with? I placed my folder on his desk. Neatly organized. Labeled tabs. Bank statements. Medical documentation. Pharmacy confirmation. He noticed the structure immediately. This looks serious, he said gently. It is, I replied. I didn't dramatize. I didn't accuse. I laid out the facts. My medication had been switched. Financial withdrawals lacked documentation. Conversations about assisted living had begun suddenly. Subtle claims about forgetfulness were being introduced. Mr. Whitaker listened without interruption. When I finished, he leaned back slowly. Do you believe your son is attempting to establish incompetence? He asked carefully. I held his gaze. I believe someone wants legal authority over my decisions. He nodded once. That typically begins with documented medical instability. Exactly. He reviewed my husband's will again, specifically the forfeiture clause. It's still enforceable, he confirmed. If evidence shows intentional manipulation for financial gain. And how much evidence qualifies? I asked. More than suspicion. Less than public scandal, he said. I almost smiled. That was all I needed. I'd like to amend something, I said. He raised an eyebrow. What did you have in mind? I folded my hands calmly. I want a medical competency evaluation conducted independently, proactively. His expression shifted to impressed. That's wise. And, I continued, I want durable power of attorney assigned to a neutral third party. Not your son. Not at this time. He made notes quickly. You're anticipating escalation, he observed. I'm preventing it. After the legal paperwork began processing, I drove home feeling lighter. Not relieved. Prepared. There's a difference. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed David's car already there. Unexpected. He stepped out as I parked. Mom, he called casually. I was in the area. Of course he was. We sat at the kitchen table. He looked concerned. Measured. I spoke to him, he began. She said you seemed off this weekend. Off. Such a convenient word. I had a long week. I replied evenly. He leaned forward slightly. You left the stove on. You barely ate. You've been forgetting appointments lately. 3 claims. 2 false. 1 exaggerated. I let silence sit between us. Then I asked quietly, have I missed any appointments? He hesitated. Well, no. Have I ever left the stove on before? Another pause. Not that I recall. Then why are we building a pattern that doesn't exist? His jaw tightened. I saw it. A crack in composure. I'm just worried, he said quickly. I know. And I almost meant it. Because maybe part of him believed his own narrative. Sometimes people justify harmful decisions by convincing themselves it's protection. I saw Dr. Harris Thursday, I added calmly. His eyes flickered. Oh, yes. We reviewed my medication. Silence. Careful silence. And he asked. And everything is documented. I said simply. The temperature in the room changed. He didn't ask what that meant. He understood. I've also updated some legal paperwork, I continued. Now he looked directly at me. What kind of paperwork? Just future planning. Independent evaluation. Neutral oversight. His face paled slightly. That seems extreme. Does it? I asked softly. We held eye contact for a long moment. And in that moment, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not love. Not concern. Fear. Not of losing me. Of losing control. Mom, he said carefully. You're making this bigger than it is. Am I? He didn't answer. Because we both knew this had never been small. After he left, I sat alone in the quiet house again. But it felt different now. Balanced. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I wasn't reacting. I was steering. My phone buzzed. A text from the pharmacy employee. Everything okay? I smiled faintly. Better than okay, I replied. Thank you. Another message followed. They came by earlier asking about refill timelines. So they were checking. Monitoring. Still trying to calculate. I typed back one final message. Let them wonder. That night, I placed the original sealed prescription bottle on my nightstand. Untouched. Proof. I didn't know yet how this would end. Maybe David would step back. Maybe Emily would push further. Maybe there would be confrontation. Maybe exposure. But one thing was certain. They had expected decline. They had planned for confusion. They had prepared to act when I appeared weak. Instead, they were now facing something they hadn't prepared for. Clarity. Documentation. Legal reinforcement. And a mother who was no longer willing to be quietly rewritten. If they wanted control, they would have to fight for it in the open. And in the open, truth tends to win. The shift happened 3 days later. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just coordinated. It started with a phone call from my bank. Mrs. Carter, we received an inquiry regarding unusual activity monitoring on your account. We just wanted to confirm that the recent restriction of authorized access was intentional. My fingers tightened slightly around the receiver. It was intentional, I replied calmly. There was a pause on the other end. Understood. We were also asked whether you had initiated a cognitive review in relation to your financial management. There it was. They were moving. No, I said evenly. I did not request that. Thank you for clarifying. When the call ended, I sat very still. They hadn't waited long. Removing David's access had triggered something. They weren't retreating. They were accelerating. That evening, Emily called instead of texting. Her tone was softer than usual. Mom, I hope you don't think we're overstepping, she began. Overstepping. Such a gentle word for intrusion. We just want to make sure you're protected. David mentioned you changed some bank settings. I did. Oh, without talking to him first. The implication hung between us. As if I had broken an unspoken rule. I didn't realize I needed permission, I said lightly. A pause. Then she laughed. Thin, controlled. Of course not. It's just, sudden changes can sometimes signal stress. There it was again. Stress. Instability. Subtle framing. I feel quite clear-minded, I replied. Another silence. Longer this time. The next morning, a certified letter arrived. Return address, a local elder care advocacy office. Inside was a notice stating that a concerned family member had requested a wellness check and cognitive safety review. Concerned family member. No name listed. But I didn't need one. The letter informed me that a social worker would be reaching out within the week. I read it twice. Then I placed it neatly into my evidence folder. Because now it was official. They weren't hinting anymore. They were building a case. I called Mr. Whitaker immediately. They've initiated a third-party review, I said. He didn't sound surprised. That was predictable, he replied. It strengthens your position. How so? Because if the evaluation confirms full competency, any prior attempts to imply instability become documented misconduct. In other words, they were walking into their own trap. That afternoon, David showed up again. No warning this time. His expression was tighter than before. Mom, why didn't you tell me about the bank? He asked as soon as he stepped inside. I didn't realize it required discussion. He exhaled sharply. They flagged it as suspicious activity. Yes, I said calmly. Because someone called to question it. His jaw clenched. So you're saying I'm under investigation now? I'm saying someone is. Silence stretched. For a moment, I saw a flicker of anger beneath his controlled surface. Then it was gone, replaced by concern. Mom, this is getting complicated. Maybe we should simplify things. Assisted living communities offer financial oversight. There it was again. Control dressed as care. I'm not moving anywhere, I said evenly. He leaned closer. You're isolating yourself. No, I was fortifying. Later that evening, the pharmacy employee texted again. They came back, asked if you picked up the corrected prescription. So they were verifying, monitoring compliance, testing whether their plan had succeeded. I did, I replied. And my doctor documented everything. The typing bubble appeared almost instantly. Good. Then another message. Be ready. They might escalate now that you're pushing back. I stared at that screen for a long time. Escalate. The word didn't scare me. It clarified things. 2 days later, the social worker called. Her voice was professional, neutral. We received a concern about your well-being. Would you be open to a brief home visit? Absolutely, I said. I meant it. Because I had nothing to hide. When she arrived Friday afternoon, my house was spotless. Not staged. Simply maintained. We sat at my kitchen table. She asked about daily routines, medication management, financial awareness, current events. I answered every question calmly. Clearly, when she asked who handled my prescriptions, I smiled slightly. I do, I said. That was the truth now. Before she left, she closed her folder and looked at me thoughtfully. I don't see any immediate cognitive concerns, she said. Thank you, I replied. If anything changes, we'll follow up. But for now, I'll document that you appear fully competent and independent. Document. That word again. But this time, in my favor. That night, David didn't call. Emily didn't text. Silence. The first real silence since Thanksgiving. Not hollow. Not tense. Strategic. They were recalculating. Because the narrative they had started to build had just been dismantled by an official report. And official records matter. More than whispers. More than staged concern. More than subtle lies about stoves and dizziness. They had tried to create doubt. Instead, they had created a paper trail. And paper trails don't disappear. I placed the social worker's summary next to my doctor's note. Next to the bank confirmation. Next to the pharmacy documentation. Piece by piece. Calmly. Because this was no longer emotional warfare. It was procedural. And in procedures, facts win. They had moved first. They had escalated. But now the board was visible. And for the first time since this began, they were the ones exposed. 3 days after the social worker's visit, the silence finally broke. It wasn't a phone call. It wasn't a text. It was a voicemail. I was in the garden trimming the last of the fall hydrangeas when my phone buzzed. In my cardigan pocket. I didn't check it immediately. I've learned that urgency is often artificial. When I went back inside and pressed play, I recognized Emily's voice instantly. Except this time, it wasn't sweet. It wasn't measured. It wasn't careful. David, this is getting out of control, she whispered sharply. She's changing accounts, talking to lawyers. If she updates the will, we're done. You need to handle it before she locks everything down. There was a pause. shuffling. Then her voice again, lower. I told you we should have moved faster with the evaluation. The message cut off abruptly. She had meant to send it to David. She had sent it to me. For a long moment, I just stood there in my quiet kitchen, listening to the refrigerator hum. No speculation now. No interpretation. No assembling puzzle pieces. Just confirmation. I didn't call her back. I didn't confront her. Instead, I saved the voicemail. Forwarded it to myself. Then to Mr. Whitaker. Subject line, documentation. He replied within 15 minutes. Do not respond emotionally. Preserve the recording. We will address this formally. Formally. That word again. Procedure. Evidence. Structure. They had escalated privately. Now they had made a mistake publicly. That evening, David called. His tone was too steady. Mom, did you get any strange messages today? There it was. The fishing line. I received a voicemail, I said calmly. Silence on the other end. Then, oh, yes. From Emily. Another silence. Longer this time. She must have dialed wrong, he said quickly. She must have. I let the words sit. He didn't ask what was said. He didn't need to. Mom, he began again, voice tightening. We're just trying to make sure you're secure. You've been acting defensive. Defensive. An interesting choice of word. Protective, I corrected gently. Of what? Of myself. He exhaled. You don't trust us. That was the first honest sentence he'd spoken in weeks. I trust patterns, I replied quietly. And lately, the pattern hasn't been comforting. He didn't argue. He couldn't. The next morning, Mr. Whitaker called personally. I've reviewed the voicemail, he said. Combined with the pharmacy documentation and the attempted competency report, this establishes intent. Intent. The missing piece. Next step? I asked. You have two options, he said. You can confront them privately with legal presence. Or you can amend the will immediately and notify them afterward. I looked around my kitchen. The same kitchen where I had fed David cereal before school. Where I had iced his birthday cakes. Where I had once believed love was enough protection. I don't want revenge, I said carefully. This isn't revenge, Mr. Whitaker replied. It's prevention. By Friday afternoon, the amendments were drafted. If any beneficiary was found to have initiated fraudulent medical interference, financial coercion, or competency manipulation, they would forfeit inheritance entirely. Additionally, 50% of my estate would transfer to a charitable foundation supporting elder abuse prevention if such conduct were proven. Not out of spite. Out of principle. That weekend, David and Emily invited me to dinner. Neutral territory. A restaurant downtown. Public. Strategic. I agreed. When I arrived, they were already seated. Emily's smile was tight. David's eyes searched my face for clues. How are you feeling? She asked. Clear, I said simply. We ordered. Small talk floated awkwardly between us. Weather. Traffic. Holiday decorations appearing too early this year. Then I placed my phone gently on the table. Screen down. But present. I received your voicemail, I said calmly. Emily's hand froze around her water glass. David went pale. It was a mistake, she said quickly. I know. Silence. Then I added, it won't be repeated. David swallowed. What does that mean? It means, I replied evenly, that I've updated my legal protections. Independent oversight is in place. Documentation has been filed. And any further attempts to question my competency will activate clauses neither of you will enjoy. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply stated facts. The way adults do. Emily's composure cracked first. You're twisting this, she said sharply. We were worried about you. Worry doesn't involve altering medication, I answered quietly. Her eyes widened. So she hadn't known I knew that part. David looked at her, then at me. The silence was no longer strategic. It was exposed. I won't be manipulated, I continued calmly. And I won't be moved. If you'd like a relationship with me, it will be based on honesty. David opened his mouth, closed it, then finally said, You're serious? Yes. Not emotional. Not angry. Just firm. Dinner ended early. No dramatic exit. No shouting. Just a quiet bill paid and chairs sliding back. As I walked to my car, I felt something I hadn't felt since this began. Not victory. Not triumph. Clarity. They had tried. Subtlety. They had tried escalation. They had tried official channels. And now they understood something essential. I was not declining. I was documenting. I was not confused. I was prepared. And from this point forward, Any move they made would be measured, because the board was no longer hidden, and the next mistake would cost them far more than they ever anticipated. The week after that dinner felt different. Not tense, not explosive, just exposed. David didn't call for 3 days. Emily didn't text at all. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I wasn't being monitored. I was being avoided. Silence can mean many things. Guilt, strategy, or recalculation. I focused on routine. Morning coffee at 6:15. Medication from the sealed bottle. Bank statements reviewed once a week. No more surprises. No more blind trust. On Thursday afternoon, my phone rang again. It wasn't David. It was my grandson, Noah. He's 12. Old enough to notice tension. Young enough to be honest. "Grandma," he said quietly. "Dad's mad a lot lately. Did I do something?" That question hit deeper than any voicemail. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "You didn't do anything." He hesitated. "Mom says you don't trust us anymore." There it was. The new narrative. I took a slow breath. "Trust works both ways, Noah." Silence. Then he asked something that made my chest tighten. "Are you moving away?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm staying right where I am." Because that mattered. Stability matters to children. Control matters to adults. And I wasn't giving up either. That evening, David finally came over. No warning. No Emily. Just him. He looked tired. Not angry this time. Tired. We sat at the kitchen table again. The same table where this story had slowly unfolded. "You really amended the will?" he asked quietly. "Yes." "And added clauses?" "Yes." He rubbed his forehead. "You think I'd actually hurt you?" The question wasn't defensive. It was almost pleading. "I think," I replied carefully, "that you made decisions based on fear of losing control." His jaw tightened slightly. "We were trying to protect the future." "Whose future?" I asked softly. He didn't answer. "I never intended to hurt you," he said finally. "I believe that," I replied. And I did. Intent doesn't erase action, but it explains it. "You could have talked to me," I added. "We thought you'd refuse. You didn't give me the chance." Silence settled between us again. This one felt different. Less calculated. More human. Then he said something I didn't expect. "Emily panicked," he admitted. "After your bank change. She thought you were cutting us out. And she pushed." I nodded slowly. "And you followed." He didn't argue. Because that part was true. "I'm not cutting you out," I said calmly. "But I won't be managed." He looked at me for a long moment. "You recorded the voicemail?" "Yes." "And the medication?" "Yes." Another pause. "So where does that leave us?" That was the real question. Not about money. Not about inheritance. About us. "It leaves us with a choice," I said quietly. "You can step back. Accept boundaries. Rebuild honestly. And if we don't, then the documents stay in place. No threats. No raised voice. Just reality." David leaned back in his chair. For the first time, I saw something shift. Not fear. Understanding. "You've already won," he said. "This isn't a competition," I replied. But part of him believed it was. Because control feels like victory to people who are afraid. "I need you to understand something," I continued. "When your father and I wrote that forfeiture clause, it wasn't because we doubted you." He looked up. "It was because we knew power changes people." He didn't interrupt. "You weren't trying to harm me," I said. "But you were trying to control an outcome before it was yours to control." The words landed. Heavy. True. After a long silence, he nodded once. "I'll tell Emily to step back." "That's your decision," I said. "I don't want this to turn into lawyers and investigations," he added. "It won't," I replied, "if the behavior stops." When he left that night, I didn't feel victorious. I felt cautious. Because conversations don't erase intent. They only redirect it. The next few days were quiet again. But this time, the silence didn't feel like plotting. It felt like distance. Emily didn't come by. No more surprise visits. No more casual remarks about assisted living. No more subtle gaslighting about stoves and memory lapses. Space. Respectful space. On Sunday morning, I received one final text from the pharmacy employee. "Everything stable?" I smiled slightly. "For now," I replied. Because stability isn't a guarantee. It's maintenance. That afternoon, I sat alone in my living room. Sunlight coming through the same curtains. The same house. The same life. But something had shifted permanently. I no longer assumed good intentions without verification. I no longer ignored small inconsistencies. And I no longer mistook silence for safety. David had stepped back. Emily had retreated. The legal protections were in place. But trust? Trust would take time. Because trust isn't restored by apology. It's restored by behavior. And behavior takes consistency. I folded my hands in my lap and looked around the room. I wasn't isolated. I wasn't confused. I wasn't declining. I was aware. And awareness is the strongest protection anyone my age can have. This wasn't the end. But it was the line. The line that said, you can be my family. But you will not control my life. Not quietly. Not strategically. Not ever again. 2 weeks after that conversation, Thanksgiving finally felt like it had ended. Not because the decorations were taken down. Not because the leftovers were gone. But because the fear was gone. The message that had flashed on my phone that night, don't eat anything. Trust me, had started a chain reaction none of us could undo. And now, standing in the quiet of my kitchen one evening in early December, I realized something important. The message hadn't just saved me from a possible mistake. It had forced the truth into the open. Emily didn't come around much after that. When she did, she was polite, careful, measured. No more comments about assisted living. No more subtle reminders about future planning. No more soft suggestions that I was forgetting things. The tone had changed. Because the balance had changed. David still visited every Sunday, but now he knocked. He waited. He asked before opening drawers. That may sound small, but respect often returns in small gestures first. One Sunday afternoon, he brought Noah with him. We sat in the living room with hot chocolate, the fireplace humming softly. No tension, no strategic pauses, just quiet family space. At one point, Noah looked at me and asked, "Grandma, are you okay now?" Children ask the clearest questions. "Yes," I said gently. "I'm more than okay." And I meant it. Because okay isn't about comfort. It's about clarity. Later that evening, after they left, David lingered by the door. "I've been thinking," he said carefully. "That's good," I replied with a soft smile. He exhaled. I didn't realize how far we were. "Pushing." "You weren't pushing," I said calmly. "You were steering." He didn't argue, because now he understood the difference. "I thought I was protecting you," he added. "I don't need protection from my own life," I answered. "I need partnership. And honesty." He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." This time, it didn't sound defensive. It didn't sound strategic. It sounded human. And that mattered. I never found out who sent that original message. The unknown number was deactivated a week later. The pharmacy employee told me they couldn't trace it. Part of me suspects someone close to the situation saw something and decided to act. Maybe someone who didn't feel powerful enough to speak openly. Maybe someone who knew more than they were allowed to say. But strangely, I stopped needing to know. Because the purpose of the message wasn't exposure. It was interruption. It interrupted momentum. It interrupted assumption. It interrupted control. And sometimes, that's enough. The will remains amended. The clauses remain in place. The documentation is still secured. Not because I expect betrayal, but because peace is stronger when it's protected. David knows that now. Emily knows that now. And more importantly, I know that now. A few days before Christmas, Emily called me directly. That hadn't happened in months. Her voice was softer than usual. "I wanted to ask if you'd like to host Christmas Eve," she said. There was hesitation in her tone. Not manipulation. Uncertainty. "I would," I replied. And I meant it. Because this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishment. It was about recalibration. Family isn't about winning. It's about learning where the boundaries are and choosing to respect them. Christmas Eve arrived quietly. No drama. No tension beneath the surface. Just food, laughter, and ordinary conversations. At one point, Emily helped me in the kitchen. We worked side by side in silence for a few minutes. Then she spoke. "I didn't see it clearly before," she admitted. "See what?" I asked gently. "That control can look like care." I didn't respond right away, because that sentence had taken courage. "It can," I said finally. "And sometimes fear disguises itself as planning." She nodded. And for the first time in a long time, I believed we were standing on equal ground. Not above, not below, equal. Later that night, after everyone left, I sat alone by the tree. The house was quiet. Again, the same house, the same walls, but I felt different inside it. Stronger. Not because I had outmaneuvered anyone. Not because I had uncovered a conspiracy, but because I had chosen awareness over comfort. Many people my age are told to stay quiet, to avoid conflict, to trust blindly, to be grateful someone is handling things. But handling things and taking over are not the same. Love does not require surrender. Family does not require silence. And aging does not require giving up authority over your own life. That message, "Don't eat anything, trust me," had terrified me in the moment. My heart had skipped a beat. I had felt vulnerable, exposed, alone. But looking back now, I realized something unexpected. That message gave me back my voice. It forced conversations that needed to happen. It revealed cracks before they became fractures. It reminded my son that I am still capable, still aware, still in control. And that is the real ending to this story. Not fear, not betrayal, not even suspicion, but balance. Because in the end, what saved our family wasn't confrontation. It wasn't legal documents. It wasn't even the warning. It was the decision to face the truth and refuse to be quietly erased. I still host dinners. I still laugh with my grandson. I still manage my own life. And now, when my phone lights up during a family gathering, my heart doesn't race. Because I know something I didn't fully know before. Trust is powerful, but self-trust is stronger.